The moment when innocence fractured and the world shifted beneath the weight of a single choice rises before us like a slow, trembling breath drawn across the surface of creation, carrying within it the quiet ache of human longing, the subtle pull of curiosity, the ancient whisper of a voice that questions what is good, and the vast unfolding consequences that would ripple through every generation, shaping the way we wrestle with desire, trust, fear, and the hope that somehow, even in our breaking, a path toward restoration still waits to be found. The garden rests in a stillness so complete it feels as though the world itself is listening. The early light settling gently across branches heavy with fruit. The air warm with the scent of life, untouched by regret. And in the midst of this quiet harmony walk, a man and a woman who have never known fear, never tasted shame, never imagined that a single moment could alter the rhythm of their existence. Their steps are unhurried, their hearts unburdened, their minds unshadowed by suspicion, and the world around them seems to welcome them with a kind of joyful recognition, as though every leaf and breeze and stream was shaped to delight in their presence. They move with the ease of beings who have never hidden, who have never questioned their worth, who have never felt the ache of distance from the one who formed them. Yet beneath the canopy of branches, another presence watches with patient intent, its gaze lingering on the openness of their trust, the softness of their innocence, the unguarded wonder that has never learned to fear deception. Eve pauses near the tree, whose fruit gleams with a beauty that feels both inviting and forbidden. And in that fragile stillness, the serpent's voice slips into the air with a softness that feels harmless, shaping a question that settles into her thoughts like a seed waiting to take root. She studies the fruit with new curiosity, noticing its shimmer, its promise, its subtle pull toward something more. And as the world leans toward a choice that will reshape its destiny, you can help carry this unfolding journey by adding your voice to the reflection it stirs, allowing the story to deepen its resonance within you. Eve turns toward the serpent, not with fear, but with the openness of someone who has never encountered a reason to doubt. And the creature's question lingers in her mind with a quiet persistence that begins to reshape the way she sees the world around her. The boundary God set, once clear and protective, now feels uncertain, as though perhaps it was not a safeguard but a limitation, as though the fruit might hold something she was meant to experience but had been kept from. The thought is small, almost delicate, yet it presses against her heart with a subtle force, inviting her to imagine a version of herself that is wiser, stronger, more complete. She studies the fruit again, noticing its beauty with a new intensity, the way it seems to shimmer with possibility, the way it awakens a longing she has never felt before. Adam stands nearby, watching her with trust as unguarded as her own, unaware that the ground beneath them is shifting, that the harmony they have always known trembles under the weight of a question they were never meant to entertain. The serpent's voice weaves suggestion into desire, desire into justification, justification into action, until the moment arrives when Eve reaches out, her fingers closing around the fruit with a mixture of hesitation and anticipation. The bite is small, almost quiet, yet the world seems to exhale in sorrow as innocence tears like a thin veil. And when she turns to Adam, offering him what she has taken, he accepts it not out of rebellion, but out of a bond so deep he cannot imagine standing apart from her. And as the taste settles on their tongues, a new awareness floods their minds, a sharp recognition that something precious has slipped from their grasp, opening the door for us to explore how this ancient moment mirrors the choices and struggles we face today. The moment Adam and Eve tasted the fruit becomes more than an ancient story when we recognize how familiar its pattern feels in our own lives. Because temptation rarely arrives as a violent shove, but as a quiet suggestion that reshapes how we see what is in front of us. The serpent's question did not force Eve's hand. It reframed her perspective, turning a boundary meant for protection into something that felt restrictive, turning trust into suspicion, turning contentment into longing. And this same shift happens in us when we begin to believe that what God has given is not enough, that what He has withheld is unfair, or that our desires are wiser than His wisdom. The fall begins not with rebellion, but with a subtle reordering of the heart, a moment when we start listening to the wrong voice. Eve's gaze changed before her actions did, and this is where the story touches our daily lives with uncomfortable clarity. We too often fall long before we act, when we entertain thoughts that distort truth, when we nurture desires that pull us away from what is good, when we allow our imagination to paint a version of life that promises more than obedience ever could. Adam's choice mirrors this as well, for he does not resist or question. He simply follows the pull of relationship over the call of truth, revealing how easily love, loyalty, or fear of conflict can lead us into decisions that wound us. And as we reflect on how these ancient patterns echo through our own choices, you can help deepen this shared journey by offering your thoughts in a way that strengthens the conversation and keeps the reflection alive. The moment their eyes opened, Adam and Eve felt the weight of something they had never known before, the sharp sting of shame. It settled over them like a cold wind, exposing the vulnerability they had never needed to hide. And suddenly, the garden that once felt like home became a place where every leaf and shadow seemed to accuse them. They scrambled to cover themselves, weaving together leaves that cannot hold, trying to hide from each other and from the God who had walked with them in perfect fellowship. The shift is immediate and devastating. What once felt natural now feels unbearable. And the intimacy they shared dissolves into fear and distance. When God calls to Adam, the question is simple: where are you? Yet it carries a depth that reaches far beyond location. It is the question that echoes through every human heart after every failure, every moment of compromise, every step away from what is good. Adam answers with fear, not honesty, and the instinct to hide becomes the first reflex of a broken soul. Blame follows quickly, revealing how sin fractures relationships long before it destroys circumstances. Adam blames Eve, Eve blames the serpent, and the unity that once defined them splinters into self-protection and accusation. This moment is not merely a story of ancient failure. It is a mirror held up to our own lives, showing how easily we hide behind excuses, how quickly we shift responsibility, how instinctively we cover what we fear others might see. And as this story presses into the places where we too feel exposed, you can help carry its weight forward by sharing the reflections it stirs within you, allowing the conversation to deepen and continue. The judgments God speaks over the serpent, the woman, and the man reveal not only the consequences of sin, but the deeper truth that brokenness always spreads outward, touching every part of life in ways we rarely anticipate. The serpent's humiliation becomes a symbol of deception's ultimate defeat, reminding us that the voices that lead us astray never have the final word. The woman's pain in childbirth reflects the tension between joy and sorrow that now marks human experience, showing how even our greatest blessings can carry the weight of struggle. The man's toil reveals how the world itself resists us, how work becomes both meaningful and exhausting, how the ground that once yielded easily now demands sweat and perseverance. These consequences are not punishments meant to crush, but realities meant to reveal the cost of stepping outside God's design. They show us that sin is never contained, never isolated, never harmless. It ripples through relationships, emotions, desires, and even the physical world. Yet woven through these words is a thread of hope, the promise that the serpent's influence will one day be crushed, that the story does not end in defeat, but moves toward redemption. This promise becomes the anchor that holds us when we face the consequences of our own choices, reminding us that God does not abandon us to the mess we create. And as we consider how these ancient truths speak into our own struggles, our fractured relationships, our weary efforts, our longing for restoration, you can help sustain this journey by adding your voice to the reflection, allowing the story to shape the way we walk forward. The garden that once felt like a sanctuary now stands before Adam and Eve as a place they can no longer inhabit without trembling. For the presence of God, which once wrapped them in comfort, now exposes the truth they tried to hide. The divine words settle over them with a weight that is neither rage nor abandonment, but the solemn unveiling of what their choice has set in motion. And as the judgments fall into place, the world around them seems to shift in response. The ground, once generous and effortless, now feels resistant beneath Adam's feet, as though creation itself recoils from the fracture that has entered it. Eve feels the echo of future generations within her, the tension between life and pain, hope and sorrow, promise and struggle. The serpent, once poised and cunning, now lies in the dust, its defeat sealed in a prophecy that stretches far beyond the boundaries of the garden. Yet even in this moment of consequence, God's tenderness breaks through the heaviness. He makes garments for Adam and Eve, clothing them with care, covering the shame they could not hide, offering protection even as he enforces the boundary that now must stand between holiness and brokenness. The garments are more than coverings. They are symbols of a God who refuses to abandon his creation, who steps into the aftermath of their choices with compassion rather than contempt, when he leads them toward the edge of Eden. The air feels heavy with the ache of departure, the sorrow of leaving behind a world that once felt like home. And as they step into the unknown, carrying the weight of their choice and the faint glimmer of a promise not yet fulfilled, you can help carry this story forward by sharing the reflections it stirs within you, allowing its truth to deepen the journey we walk together. The exile from Eden is more than a moment of loss. It is a portrait of the human condition, a mirror reflecting the tension we all feel between who we were created to be and who we have become. Adam and Eve step into a world that is still beautiful yet undeniably altered, a world where joy and sorrow now coexist, where work carries both purpose and strain, where relationships hold both intimacy and conflict, where the longing for God remains but is now marked by distance. This tension is not confined to ancient history. It pulses through every human life, shaping the way we navigate desire, fear, hope, and the ache for restoration. The guarded entrance to Eden reveals a truth we often resist, that we cannot return to innocence by our own effort. The cherubim and the flaming sword stand not as symbols of divine cruelty, but as reminders that the way back to perfect communion cannot be forced, earned, or reclaimed through human striving. We feel this reality in our own attempts to fix ourselves, to hide our flaws, to cover our shame with achievements, relationships, or distractions. Yet no matter how hard we try, the gap remains, reminding us that the restoration we long for must come from beyond us. The consequences spoken over Adam and Eve also speak into our daily lives. The struggle of work reflects the tension between purpose and frustration, reminding us that meaning often emerges through perseverance rather than ease. The pain woven into childbirth mirrors the truth that new life, whether physical, emotional, or spiritual, often comes through struggle. The relational tension between man and woman reveals how easily love becomes complicated, how quickly trust can fracture, how deeply we long for connection even as we fear vulnerability. These patterns are not signs that God has abandoned us, but reminders of the brokenness we inhabit, the world we now navigate, and the grace we desperately need. Yet even in exile, hope is present. The promise spoken over the serpent, that one day the offspring of the woman would crush its head, becomes the first whisper of redemption, the earliest sign that God's plan was never to leave humanity in its brokenness. This promise threads through the entire biblical story, pointing toward a future where the distance between God and humanity will be bridged, where shame will be covered not by fragile leaves, but by divine mercy, where the way back into God's presence will be opened not by human effort, but by sacrificial love. In our own lives, this hope invites us to stop hiding, to stop pretending, to stop carrying the weight of our failures alone. It calls us to bring our shame, our fear, our fractured relationships, and our weary striving into the presence of a God who still seeks us, still clothes us, still leads us forward, even when we feel unworthy. The story of the fall is not meant to crush us, but to awaken us, to help us see the depth of our need and the greater depth of God's compassion. And as we allow this ancient story to speak into our present struggles, it invites us to walk with humility, honesty, and hope, trusting that the God who met Adam and Eve in their brokenness will meet us in ours, guiding us toward the restoration He has promised. The story of Eden's loss lingers like a quiet ache, reminding us that the fracture at the beginning still echoes through our own lives. Yet it also whispers of a hope that has never faded, a promise that the distance between humanity and God will not remain forever. As you carry this truth into your own journey, let it draw you toward honesty, healing, and the quiet confidence that restoration is already unfolding. And if this reflection has stirred something within you, let your voice join ours in a way that helps this conversation continue.